Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third and final edition of Preservation Perspectives for the 2024 LA City Council election. This is our way of speaking to the candidates and asking them about preservation. I know the candidates get asked a lot of questions, but sometimes you don't get that lens of preservation, and that's why we're here at the Conservancy to spread that message. I just want to thank all of our members and supporters. We could not do this work without you. If you live in the district, you're welcome to tune in and use this as a resource, but do please consider becoming a member or supporting us in any way. The Conservancy is a preservation organization, but we care deeply about the places and people that make Los Angeles special. It's an exceedingly diverse city. We celebrate its diversity. And one of our main jobs right now is managing change. LA is always changing. And I know that's one of the biggest threats to preservation, but also one of the greatest opportunities for the city. So we're here to speak to the candidates to see how they'll manage that change. I want to introduce the candidate, Ysabel Jurado. Thank you for being here. She represents some of the neighborhoods that are deeply rooted in what we've been doing for many years at the Conservancy. As you know, our office is downtown. We've had really strong engagement with Boyle Heights, Highland Park, El Sereno, Lincoln Heights, and others. With that, I'll start the questions. Thank you, Ysabel, for being here. Let me just pull them up. So the first question we have for you is, what role do you see historic preservation playing in development, housing, and community building activities in LA's CD14 district? You're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay. Well, yeah. Can you repeat the question? Sorry, my earphones are wigging out.
What role do you see historic preservation playing in development, housing, and community building activities in LA's CD14 district?
Thank you for that question. I mean, preservation is key to a lot of the issues that we see, and the fact that you're present in a lot of the neighborhoods in this district. I think it's no coincidence that your presence in the district, whether it's Boyle Heights, Lincoln Heights, Highland Park, and your preservation presence there is representative of folks that are also in the movement that I've been in, housing affordability and housing justice or renter rights, to make sure that we can preserve our buildings, especially for renters and low-income folks in these communities that have historically been marginalized or have a rich culture and history. I'm talking specifically about Boyle Heights, which has been able to resist gentrification in some spectacular ways due to its strong resistance. But how can we look at this change as an opportunity, right? I'm of the philosophy of development without displacement. As an eviction defense attorney, that was like at the end stage of someone losing their homes. And so in trying to do a more hopeful enterprise, working with community land trust to obtain land, keep it in the community, keep it affordable, preservation to me is just one of those tools in our toolkit to make sure that the communities that raise us can keep us and keep the integrity of these neighborhoods. You know, one of the neighborhoods I'd focused on when I was an eviction defense attorney was historic Filipino town, which was the first landing place for Filipinos here in LA. There's about 500,000 people, Filipinos, go to historic Filipino town, but losing its identity and losing its constituency and putting the history in the name is something that I don't want these other neighborhoods to be. And the last thing I'll say is, like, there is that balance in the change for progress and preservation. And while I strongly favor preservation, I recognize that our district must evolve to meet the needs of a growing population. And I'll strive to find a balance that allows for necessary development while protecting our most valuable historic resources.
Thank you. For the second question, for nearly 15 years, advocates of El Sereno have advocated for preservation of the Maycrest bungalows and have sought to convert them to a community art space. The bungalows are one of the many Caltrans-owned homes along the 710 corridor that have sat vacant for decades and are now finally being deaccessioned. The Maycrest bungalows were recently sold to Hackla to be rehabilitated as affordable housing. What is your future? What is your approach to the future of the bungalows as well as the other 710 homes?
Yeah, thank you for that question. As an attorney and a community lawyer that's supporting tenants, I have helped some of the reclaimers who were reclaiming those vacant homes that are owned by the Caltrans during the height of the pandemic to get housing and have their needs met. And for me, supporting the El Sereno Community Land Trust and those residents, we formed the El Sereno Housing Justice Cooperative there so that those tenants could have a right to home ownership for the homes that they had lived in. And so my goal as a council member would be to work with these community groups that are vying for a solution for their community. It's central to this campaign and how we operate, but to how I want to lead, which is co-governance, which is highlights the relationship between the person governing and the people that are governed, and really relying on one another in that relationship and listening to the community needs, whether it has to do with these residential homes and ensuring that there's a just transition for these residents from the cooperative who have become members of our community, or with the bungalow. I really don't like the city's budget is strapped. And so, and I'm not the one that's living in El Sereno, right? These folks are. And so leaning on the expertise of our residents who have already voiced their opinion on what they think is best for these bungalows, and listening and then helping them achieve that is really the goal of what I'd want. Because I don't want to be a council member that imposes something on a community without listening, and instead just want to work in close relationship with these community members to make sure that folks have a just transition, that the development is in line with the community's wants and needs, and that we can and that I could facilitate that process as easily as possible.
Thank you. The next question is, due to hybrid schedules and work from home, downtown LA has been noticeably more empty, despite a large number of adaptive reuse housing projects that have been built. Further, some feel less safe downtown now more than ever. This has impacted businesses who depend on office workers, cultural institutions, nightlife, and of course, our historic Broadway theaters. What strategies would you propose to reactivate and revitalize downtown?
Yeah, we are in a commercial foreclosure crisis in downtown with law firms that have reduced their footprint there and vacant buildings, whether it's Bunker Hill or throughout downtown. And so looking at this issue is crucial, and thinking about how can we facilitate the changeover of uses for these buildings so that they're no longer vacant. And, some of the ideas that we have are like converting these, and that we've heard from residents or experts in policymakers. None of the stuff that I say is just like from a vacuum. It's from what we've talked to people about, whether it means using those old office buildings on Bunker Hill and transferring them for hotels for the Olympic and keeping that as part of our city, or transitioning the use for a school of some sort. Those are ways to fill up those vacancies, because the studies show that when an area is crowded, people feel safer. In addition to these institutional changes of like changing what kind of use it is, or zoning it would be, the other things that we think about in terms of attracting development to downtown is like providing downtown residents with the amenities that they want, whether it's a cobbler, it's a tailor, and making sure that there are other things that provide for people not just to live, work, and play in downtown, but to have families and age well. So like daycares, dog groomers, there's a lot of those, but like having dog parks as well. The needs of downtown should be, and amenities that they have should be the same as those in Eagle Rock, but they're not on par, right? And so working together to creatively create these amenities in these vacant spaces in a way that meets the urban environment. Like a dog park in downtown LA may not look like the Eagle Rock one, right? You go to K-Town and there's like a golfing range on the roof, and it's very cool, but that's the kind of thing that we're looking at to be creative and bold and meet the needs to keep downtown vibrant. And the other thing is like the city services aspect to it. Like over 40% of the lights downtown are out. Like people don't feel safe if the streets are not clean and the bids don't have, are taking tons of trash every single day out of the district. And so supporting with good city services, because we know um, there is an exact correlation between lighting and cleanliness of streets in order to make people safe. And so those are the ways that I think we can try to revitalize downtown. And thinking about what we can do to attract businesses, but definitely if you're a community-owned business, we're definitely going to provide like a small business liaison for folks who can help usher emerging businesses to navigate City Hall so that Starbucks can't just cut the line because they have more money, to make sure that you can get, in your store as soon as possible, so that you can stay open and serve the needs of the neighborhood.
Thank you. CD14 will soon be governed by two new community plans, DTLA 2040 and the Boyle Heights Community Plan. Both plans seek to balance the need for new housing, tenant protections, preservation, industrial uses, and green space. What are the elements of these plans that you believe will be most successful, and what would you have changed?
Yeah, I am just amazed with these community plans that have been developed. DTLA 2040 has been a long time in the making and has so many different stakeholders that have been part of it in a meaningful way. And so looking to honor that. I think the adaptive reuse ordinance, or that is in the downtown LA plan, is inspiring. It's something that we really should be looking at. And I think we are at the city, and have to work with the state to make sure we can do that. But transitioning our buildings that were once for office spaces to residential and hastening the process, I think that is one of the best things that are happening in it, and facilitating that new development and switching it, because once we are able to do that, we can change these empty vacant buildings to something else and meet our housing development goals in need. When we look at what 2040 is trying to do for jobs, enhancing economic opportunities, which supports mixed use developments that combine residential and commercial spaces to foster job growth and alongside housing, but looking at how we can also preserve certain industries and certain jobs, thinking about the garment workers and how they can maintain their livelihoods here in the city, even though we are changing industries. But how can we facilitate that process and protect our workers at the same time? I think that's something I definitely am thinking about for 2040. And when it comes to the Boyle Heights Community Plan, I give a huge shout out to all the community members, East Side Leads, CPC, a lot of the folks that are out there in Boyle Heights that have been gathering together, Fideicomiso Tierra Libre, like all of those groups that have really been pushing the envelope on what they've been demanding, whether it means like preference for residents to get access to low-income developments. But I really appreciate what they put in there for commercial spaces, which is, allowing like a variance in the corners for these tienditas in residential neighborhoods, because those are people's, low-income immigrants' pathway to middle class. And so allowing that, noticing and honoring the nature of the neighborhood, I think was one of the great things. And, I know some of the work that you do aligns with some of my work, which was like preserving legacy businesses. In my day job as an attorney, it was transitioning these businesses into worker cooperatives so that workers could have a share of the profit and equal democratic ownership. And those are ways that I think, the plan and supporting businesses can move us to this future where we can all benefit. And so I appreciate all the work that has been done on all of those.
Thank you. Just a few more questions. And I think we got the hard ones done. Nearly half of the city's housing stock was built prior to 1960, and 620,000 units are covered by the Rent Stabilization Ordinance, or RSO. These units are on average more affordable than new units. We are also losing older affordable housing due to Ellis Act evictions, displacement for long-term tenants, and demolition of older multifamily housing. What is your plan to preserve and invest in our remaining existing affordable housing stock?
Yeah, I appreciate that question a lot. I mean, our tenants that are being evicted from rent stabilized, rent controlled, I guess, rent control. Rent stabilized ordinance is rent control, just like for, colloquial terms, right? And so these rent controlled units are the ones as attorneys we try to fight for to maintain, because once that person is out of that unit, we kind of lose it, right? And so preservation of our rent controlled units are needed now more than ever, especially in this economy and when our housing affordability is just nowhere near where people's needs are, and especially when people's incomes don't go up by the rent like 3% every year or 10% every year, but the rents are going up as well. And so one of the strategies that, been talking to folks in our coalition has been about how can we use the ULA monies in order to provide subsidies or rental assistance for our seniors that are living in these housing developments that have these covenants that are expiring in the next decade. The number one group of growing homeless residents in the city of LA are our seniors, and them to find housing on this market with their fixed income and maybe a relocation of $20,000, that it'll be exhausted in a year, and their Social Security doesn't catch up to market rate, right? And I mean, I canvassed someone who was subject to the 6% increase that council permitted, and he was a senior, and he self evicted himself, and he had to move somewhere else and have a roommate after having a studio because he couldn't afford it. And he told me that, I have SSI, and in order to be able to afford to live in this place that I've lived here for 15 years, I'd have to get another disability and qualify for it. And so preserving these, using the monies from ULA to make sure that we preserve these. But then the second policy that I've just been so I've been championing on this campaign because I was a former member of the California Community Land Trust Action Board, is Tenant Opportunity Purchase Act and Community Opportunity Purchase Act. When we look at Ellis Act evictions, they can be so destructive in communities where whole communities are being evicted. If you look at Barrington Plaza, what is that? Hundreds of people living in an apartment. That does something to these local communities to lose all of those families, workers, elders in one space. And so reinserting the community into the process of being able to buy where they live, right? The Tenant Opportunity Purchase Act and the Community Opportunity Purchase Act allows tenants who live in the building or community groups around it to have the right of first offer for a building that is for sale in their community. Often these buildings are for sale, nobody knows, it just gets bought up, but it doesn't guarantee them a right to buy. It allows them with the right to have the first offer, which frames the negotiation. And me as council member, I view myself still as a lawyer and my client being the constituents in the neighborhood. And so being the lead negotiator and having the communities and tenants say what they want and need, which right now is not even in the conversation for these. And oftentimes, if you include them in the wants and needs, it's going to be about permanent affordability or covenants that support that, and how, as a council member, can I push those through to support them?
Thank you. Approximately 10% of LA's historic cultural monuments, or HCMs, citywide tell the stories of BIPOC, women, and LGBTQ plus communities. How would you support increasing equity in our historic cultural monument program?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that question. I am a woman of color who identifies as queer. And so often our dominant history is incomplete. And it is reflective of a dominant history that highlights sometimes folks that we shouldn't be highlighting. And so wanting to make sure that in this district, we also highlight the work of women. I think so much of the work of women or queer folks is untold for, it's not part of the dominant narrative, and really uplifting it. That has been a central philosophy of this campaign as someone who has often felt like the other of the other of the other. I'm a teen mom, I'm queer, I'm not supposed to be, I'm not a career politician. Like all of these things have come together and they are my being. That's the source of who I am. And on this campaign, seeking to leverage whatever resources we have to uplift other folks that haven't been unheard. And so that's just aligned with all of the policies and ethos of this campaign. And so you betcha I'll be a companion and fighter for all of you, because there are some of my favorite women that I know are not represented in our city enough. And I think having naming that honors them, especially Black, Indigenous, people of color, or LGBTQ spectrum, is so important to just for me, but also the legacy and for our youth to widen what history means, whether it's her story or them story, but so to make sure that all of our stories are represented.
Okay, and then one last bonus question. What is your favorite historic place in Los Angeles or in your council district?
Ooh, my favorite historic place in the council district. Is this dorky to say City Hall? City Hall is one of my favorite buildings because it's so darky. My old coworker used to have the frame print of City Hall being built, and that was one of my favorite things in the Art Deco-ness of the building. And I've always been a fan of the LA Conservancy walking tour. And so there's that. And of course, the Bradbury. I just go there to think sometimes when I feel confused. And then it has ordered fancy confusion. But I think that's a dorky thing to say.
There's no wrong answer. And that's a very common one. So I just want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank everyone who's tuning in. This ends our preservation perspectives for the year. And please, everyone, go out and vote. It's your constitutional right and your democratic responsibility. Thank you.